The Trump administration has just made an unprecedented move that's sending shockwaves through Canada's mining sector and raising serious questions about national security. For the first time in history, the United States government is directly purchasing stakes in Canadian companies. And we're not talking about small investments here. This is a calculated power play that could fundamentally reshape North America's critical mineral landscape. The White House announced it was spending 35.6 million US dollars for a 10% stake in Vancouver-based Trilogy Metals Incorporated, which has mining interests in Alaska that the US government desperately wants to see developed. But here's where it gets really interesting. The US government also secured options to increase its stake further and the right to appoint a member to the company's board. This isn't just an investment, it's a strategic takeover. But Trilogy Metals wasn't the only target. The Trump administration also took a minority stake in Lithium Americas, another Vancouver-headquartered company developing one of the world's largest lithium mines in Nevada. Under this deal, the Department of Energy secured a 5% equity stake in the company and a 5% stake in its Thacker Pass lithium mining project, a joint venture with General Motors worth billions. Lawrence Herman, an international lawyer and senior fellow at the CD Howe Institute, didn't mince words about what this means. It's possibly unprecedented for the US government itself to be buying an interest in a Canadian company, he said. And he's absolutely right to be concerned. Canada should be worried about any foreign state purchasing interest in a Canadian company, especially in the sensitive critical minerals sector. Think about what's happening here. These aren't benign investments in the open market by corporations. These are strategic investments by a foreign government, and not just any government, but one that's currently engaged in a brutal trade war with Canada. Trump has repeatedly threatened to make Canada the 51st state, impose devastating tariffs on Canadian aluminum, steel, and lumber, and now he's literally buying pieces of Canadian companies.
The problem we have is that they want a car company and I want a car company, meaning the U.S. wants a car company, and they want steel and we want steel. So in other countries, they're very far away, and there's no problem. You can compete and you can do. We don't like to compete because we sort of hurt each other when we compete. And so we have a natural conflict. It's a natural business conflict, nothing wrong with it. And I think we've come a long way over the last few months, actually, in terms of that relationship. So when it comes to trade, the United States was always giving everything. They gave everything to Canada. They would let car companies leave here and go to Canada. But that hurts the United States. And, other presidents didn't see that. They weren't business oriented. They might have been good politicians in some cases, not in all cases. They were bad at both. But it's a very natural conflict, and it's something that we're working on.
The president himself has described this as a natural conflict between neighboring countries that compete for the same industries, arguing that when the US and Canada compete, they hurt each other. The implications are staggering. When a foreign government purchases a stake in a company, it raises serious concerns about whether the political interests of that government will come to dominate the company's activities. Critical technologies and sensitive information could be directed to that government, which is clearly not in Canadian interests. Even a small shareholding by a foreign state can influence the activities of the company concerned. And let's be clear about what these companies control. We're talking about lithium, copper, nickel, and other minerals that are absolutely essential for modern technology, electric vehicle batteries, renewable energy systems, defense equipment, smartphones, and countless other critical applications. These aren't just any commodities. They're the building blocks of the 21st century economy and national security infrastructure. The market reaction was immediate and dramatic. Trilogy Metals' stock price more than tripled after the announcement, while Lithium Americas' shares spiked over 30%. But here's the kicker. This massive windfall benefited some very interesting people, including billionaire Trump donor John Paulson, who has a considerable stake in Trilogy Metals. This is exactly the kind of crony capitalism that government investment can invite. Richard LeBlanc, a professor of governance, law, and ethics at York University, called it exactly what it is, a massive conflict of interest. It is uncommon for a government to have a stake in a domestic company, but it's even more uncommon for a foreign government, he told Bloomberg, To have an outside investor who can have regulatory approval, is that a conflict of interest? It absolutely is a conflict of interest. But this isn't just about two companies. The Trump administration is building an entire portfolio of strategic investments. They've also taken stakes in chipmaker Intel, rare earths company MP Materials, and secured a golden share of U.S. steel that grants the government veto power over many of the company's decisions. This brings the total number of companies in which the Trump administration has taken stakes to 5. And they're not ruling out more deals. The strategy behind this is crystal clear. Trump officials say they're focused on national security and jumpstarting a domestic mining and processing sector to reduce U.S. dependence on China for critical minerals. The administration is seeking modest equity positions in exchange for restructuring existing federal loans or enabling projects blocked by permitting or financing barriers. And here's where it gets even more complex. These investments are happening against the backdrop of an escalating trade war between the U.S. and China over rare earth minerals. Just last week, Beijing announced it was increasing export controls for 5 more rare earth metals, bringing the total number of critical minerals under export control to 12. Trump responded by threatening a massive increase of tariffs on Chinese products, which sent the U.S. stock market plunging by the widest margin in 6 months. So what can Canada do about this? Under the Investment Canada Act, Ottawa has the power to review investments by any foreign government. The guidelines were even tightened in 2022 specifically for the critical minerals sector. Since then, the government will only approve a significant foreign state investment in that sector on an exceptional basis, meaning there has to be a clear net benefit to Canada. But here's where Canadian policy gets murky. Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson recently signaled that the government isn't particularly concerned about these U.S. investments. The fact that an ally of ours chooses to make an equity investment into a Canadian company whose sole asset is in the United States, I don't think that bothers us at this time, he said. I think that's capitalism in action. But is the U.S. really still an ally when Trump is openly threatening Canadian sovereignty and waging economic warfare against Canadian industries? When asked directly if it was still appropriate to refer to the U.S. as an ally, Hodgson couldn't give a straight answer. He only said that Canada is very hopeful that we can get through this difficult time. This raises a fundamental question about Canadian policy consistency. How can Ottawa maintain that investments from China are a major national security threat, while simultaneously welcoming direct government investment from the United States, especially when that government is actively hostile to Canadian interests? Legal experts are demanding clarity on where exactly Canada draws the line. Subrata Bhattacharjee, a competition and foreign investment lawyer, put it perfectly. The story here is really, how do they actually draw that line? That they maintain some semblance of a policy designed to keep China out, but explain why they have to derogate from the policy for these 2 U.S. government investments. The broader implications of Trump's strategy are becoming clear. This isn't just about securing mineral supplies, it's about reshaping the entire North American resource sector according to American interests. By taking direct stakes in Canadian companies, the U.S. government gains unprecedented influence over Canada's critical mineral industry, the very sector that's supposed to be central to Canada's economic future. And let's not forget the environmental and Indigenous rights concerns. The Trilogy Metals investment is directly tied to the controversial Ambler Road project in Alaska, a 211-mile industrial access road that would cut through pristine wilderness, including areas near gates of the Arctic National Park. The Biden administration had blocked this project, citing risks to caribou, fish populations, and indigenous communities that rely on hunting and fishing. But Trump has now signed an executive order directing federal agencies to reissue the permits. Environmental groups and indigenous This kind of government backing provides a level of certainty and support that private investors simply can't match. Mark Chalmers, CEO of Energy Fuels, argues that the Trump administration needs to strike even more such deals if the United States is to truly secure its critical mineral supply and break its dependence on China. Multiple investments would lower the risk that comes with depending on just one company, he says. And the White House appears to agree. They're not ruling out other deals with equity stakes, according to administration officials. So where does this leave Canada? The country is caught between its largest trading partner, which is increasingly acting like a hostile power, and its need to develop its own critical mineral resources. The Canada Growth Fund has taken equity stakes in only two Canadian critical minerals companies since its launch in 2023, a fraction of what the U.S. is now doing. Canadian industry players are calling for Ottawa to follow the American lead and start making its own strategic investments. But the question remains, can Canada compete with the full financial and regulatory power of the United States government? And should it even try, or should it be focused on protecting its sovereignty and preventing foreign government control of its strategic resources? What we're witnessing is nothing less than a fundamental shift in how governments approach critical mineral security. The era of purely market-based resource development is over. State capitalism is the new reality, and countries that don't adapt risk being left behind, or worse, having their resources controlled by foreign powers. The Trump administration's investments in Canadian critical mineral companies represent a new form of economic statecraft, one that blurs the lines between investment and influence, between capitalism and control. For Canada, the challenge is clear: how to maintain sovereignty over its strategic resources while navigating an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape where allies can't always be trusted to act like allies. The stakes couldn't be higher. Critical minerals are the foundation of the modern economy and national security. Control over these resources will determine which countries thrive in the 21st century and which ones become dependent on others. Canada has some of the world's richest deposits of these materials, but if foreign governments are allowed to buy control of Canadian companies, who will really benefit from this natural wealth?
To start, the Minister of Justice will be tabling legislation within the next week with strong reforms on bail and sentencing. We're getting violent criminals and repeat offenders off the streets, full stop. Right now, in most bail hearings, the starting point is to release. And the Crown must prove why someone should not be released on bail, making it too easy for repeated violent offenders to quickly get back on the street, sometimes back into the same communities that they just committed crimes in. Our new law will flip that script by creating new reverse onus bail provisions for violent and organized crime-related offenses. We're making bail stricter to keep you safer. With so-called reverse onus bail, it will no longer be up to the Crown to prove why someone should stay behind bars. It will be up to the accused to prove to the court why they can be trusted to be released. Their risk of reoffending and their history of past 10 years will be considered. These strong new reverse onus bail provisions will apply to violent auto theft, to break and enter, to human trafficking and smuggling, to assault, to sexual assault, and to extortion involving violence or violent threats. Simply put, these changes will keep violent repeat offenders of these crimes off our streets and out of our communities. Canada's new government will also toughen sentences for repeat offenders of auto theft, of organized crime, and of home invasion, so that criminals who have repeatedly victimized your community do not have the chance to do so again.
The answer to that question may determine Canada's economic future for generations to come. This story is far from over. As the Trump administration continues to reshape American economic policy around strategic government investment, and as China tightens its grip on global rare earth supplies,